The Nature of the Psyche by Jane Roberts. Chapter 7. And this is Seth speaking now. We will begin the next chapter entitled The Psyche, Languages, and Gods, with a small g. Almost any question that you can ask about God, with a capital, can be legitimately asked of the psyche as well. It seems to you that you know yourself, but that you take the existence of your psyche on faith. At best, it often seems that you are all that you know of your psyche, and you will complain that you do not know yourself to begin with. When you say, "I want to find myself," you usually take it for granted that there is a completed, done, finished version of yourself that you have mislaid somewhere. When you think of finding God, capital G, you often think in the same terms. Now you are around yourself all the time. You are ever becoming yourself. In a manner of speaking, you are composed of those patterns of yourself that are everywhere coming together. You cannot help but be yourself. Biologically, mentally, and spiritually, you are marked as apart from all others. No cloak of conventionality can ever hide that unutterable uniqueness. You cannot help but be yourself then. In a way, physically, you are a molecular language that communicates to others, but a language with its own peculiarities. As if speaking an accepted tongue, you spoke with a biological accent that carried its own flavor and meaning. When you ask, "What is my psyche, or my soul, or who am I?" you are seeking, of course, for your own meaning as apart from what you already know about yourself. In that context, God is as known and as unknown as you are to yourself. Both God and Psyche are constantly expanding, unutterable and always becoming. You will question most likely, becoming what? For to you it usually seems that all motion tends toward a state of completion of one kind or another. You think therefore in terms of becoming perfect or becoming free. The word becoming by itself seems to leave you up in the air, so to speak, suspended without definitions. If I say, "You are becoming what you already are," then my remark sounds meaningless, for if you already are, how can you become what is already accomplished? In larger terms, however, you are always vaster than your knowledge of yourself. For in physical life, you cannot keep up with your own psychological and psychic activity. Again, in a way, your bodies speak a biological language, but in those terms you are bilingual, to say the least. You deal with certain kinds of organizations. They can be equated with biological verbs, adjectives, and nouns. These result in certain time sequences that can be compared to sentences written and read from one side, say, to the other. Pretend that your life's experience is a page of a book that you write, read, and experience from top to bottom, left to right, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph. That is the you that you know, the worldview that you understand. But other, quite as legitimate yous may write, read, and experience the same page backwards, or read each letter downward and back up again, as you would a column of figures, or others might mix and match the letters in entirely different fashions, altogether forming entirely different sentences. Still another vaster you might be aware of all the different methods of experiencing that particular page, which is your life as you understand it. You think that your consciousness is the only logical culmination of your body's reality. You read yourself in a certain accepted fashion. In the entire book of life, however, just physically speaking, there are interrelationships on adjacent levels that you do not perceive, as other portions of your own biological consciousness or biological language relate to the entire living fabric of the world. In physical terms, you are alive because of the substructures, psychic, spiritual, and biological, of which you have hardly any comprehension at all. These are implied, however, in the nature of your own consciousness, which could not exist otherwise as you know it. As language gains and attains its meaning, not only by what is included in it, but also by what is excluded, so your consciousness attains its stability also by exclusions. What you are is implied in the nature of what you are not. By the same token, you are what you are because of the existence of what you are not. You read yourself from the top of the page to the bottom, or from what you think of as the beginning to the end. Your greater reality, however, is read in terms of intensities, so that the psyche puts you together in a different way. The psyche does not mark time. To it, the intense experiences of your life exist simultaneously. In your terms, they would be the psyche's present. The psyche deals with probable events. However, so some events, perhaps that you dream but did not materialize, are quite real to the psyche. They are far more real to it than most innocuous but definite physical events, as for example, yesterday morning's breakfast. The inner events of the psyche compose the greater experience from which physical events arrive. They cast an aura that almost magically makes your life your own. Even if two people encountered precisely the same events in their lives at precisely the same time, their experiences of reality would still hardly be approximately connected. Again, you read your identities in a particular specialized fashion. Within your biological experience, however, plant, mineral, animal, and human consciousness intersect. They encounter each other. In the language of the self that you speak, these encounters are like the implied pauses in your verbal language. These other kinds of consciousness then form inner rhythms upon which you superimpose your own. These encounters of consciousness go on constantly. They form their own kind of adjacent identities. You would call them subspecies of consciousness, perhaps, but they are really identities that operate in a trans-species fashion. If you read yourself sideways in such a manner, you would discover portions of your own consciousness stretching out across the entire fabric of the earth as you understand it, becoming part of the earth's material, even as those materials become part of the self that you recognize. Your consciousness would be far less hemmed in. Time would expand adjacently. You think of yourselves physically as top dogs, however, separate from other species and other kinds of life, so that in effect you limit your own experience of your psyche. If you thought or felt in such a fashion, then you would appreciate the fact that biologically your body is yours by virtue of the mineral, plant, and animal life from which it gains its sustenance. You would not feel imprisoned, as you often do, within one corporal form, for you would understand that the body itself maintains its relative stability because of its constant give and take with the materials of the earth that are themselves possessed of consciousness. You could, to some extent, feel your body coming together and dispersing constantly, and understand how you hover within it without fearing your own annihilation upon its dismantlement. When you ask, "Who am I?" you are trying to read yourself as if you were a simple sentence already written. Instead, You write yourself as you go along. The sentence that you recognize is only one of many probable variations. You and no other choose which experiences you want to actualize. You do this as spontaneously as you speak words. You take it for granted that a sentence begun will be finished. You are in the midst of speaking yourself. The speaking, which is your life, seems to happen by itself, since you are not aware of keeping yourself alive. Your heart beats whether or not you understand anatomy. You read yourself in too narrow terms. Much of the pain connected with serious illness and death results because you have no faith in your own continuing reality. You fight pain because you have not learned to transcend it, or rather to use it. You do not trust the natural consciousness of the body, so that when its end nears, and such an end is inevitable, you do not trust the signals that your body gives that are meant to free you. Certain kinds of pain automatically eject consciousness from the body. Such pain cannot be verbalized, for it is a mixture of pain and pleasure, a tearing free, and it automatically brings about an almost exhilarating release of consciousness. Such a pain is also very brief. Under your present system, however, drugs are usually administered, in which case pain is somewhat minimized but prolonged, not triggering the natural release mechanisms. If you read yourselves adjacently, you would build up confidence in the body and in those cooperative consciousnesses that form it. You would have an intimate awareness of the body's healing processes. Also, you would not fear death as annihilation, and would feel your own consciousness gently disentangle itself from those others, so that so graciously couched it. You are a part of the world, and yet you are yourself. This does not confuse you, and you follow your own sense of identity without difficulty, even though you are everywhere surrounded by other individuals. Using this as an analogy, you are part of your psyche or your soul, dwelling within it, easily following your own sense of identity, even though that psyche also contains other identities besides the one that you think of as your own. You draw sustenance from the world and grow through its medium. You contribute your abilities and experience, helping to form the world's civilization and culture. To some strong degree, you bear the kind of relationship to your own psyche. Through ordinary methods of communication, you are able to tell what's going on in other countries besides your own, even without traveling to them. News telecasts acquaint you with the conditions around the world. Now there are also inner broadcasts going on constantly, to which, however, you are not consciously attuned. They keep you in constant touch with the other portions of your own psyche. You are also part of the world that your slightest action contributes to its reality. Now, let me read that sentence again. You are so a part of the world that your slightest action contributes to its reality. Your breath changes the atmosphere. Your encounters with others alter the fabrics of their lives and the lives of those who come in contact with them. It's easy for you to see how the cells of the body form. That is, you understand at least the cooperative nature of the cell's activities. An alteration on the part of one cell immediately causes changes in the others and brings about a difference in body behavior. It is somewhat more difficult for you to understand the ways in which your own actions and those of others combine to bring the world events. On the one hand, each of my readers is but one individual, alive on the planet, at any given time. It may seem that the individual has little power. On the other hand, each individual alive is a necessary one. It is true to say that the world begins and ends with each person. That is, each of your actions is so important, contributing to the experience of others whom you do not know, that each individual is like a center about which the world revolves. If you did not do what you did today, for example, the entire world would be in some way different. Your acts ripple outward in ways that you do not understand, interacting with the experience of others and hence forming world events. The most famous and the most anonymous person are connected through such a fabric, and in actions seemingly small and innocuous can end up changing history as you understand it. Children often feel that the world and time began with their birth. They take the world's past on faith. It's very important. In very important terms, this is quite a legitimate feeling, for no one else can experience the world from any other viewpoint except from his or her own, or affect it except through private action. En masse, that individual action obviously causes world events. In metaphysical terms, you have your being in your psyche or soul in somewhat the same manner. Identities are obviously psychic environments, primarily rather than physical ones. Physical objects cannot move through each other, as a table cannot move through a chair. Mental events behave differently. They can mix and merge and move through each other while still maintaining their own focus. They can interact on psychic levels in the way that events do on physical levels, but without physical restrictions. Though you are a portion of your psyche, then your identity is still inviolate. It will not be submerged or annihilated in a greater self. It carries a stamp, a divine mark of its own integrity. It follows its own focus. It knows itself as itself, even while its own existence as itself may be but a portion of another identity. Moreover, there's nothing to stop it from exploring this other greater identity or moving into it, so to speak. When this happens, both identities are changed. In greater terms, the psyche or soul nowhere exists as a finished product or entity. On the other hand, it is always becoming, and that becoming happens on the part of each of its own portions. Your very physical state and existence are dependent upon portions of your psyche's reality, or your soul's existence, of which you are normally unaware. Those portions are also dependent upon your existence, however. You take your breathing, your moving for granted, though they are unconsciously produced. In certain terms, however, at one time you had to learn how to do these things that you are not now consciously concerned with. At still another level of reality, activities that you now consciously claim as your own have, in those same terms and from another viewpoint, become unconscious, providing a psychic history from which other identities emerge, as it seems that your own identities emerge from unconscious bodily activity. In certain very definite terms, the existence of one person implies the existence of all others who have lived or will live. Your own existence is implied, therefore, in everyone else's, and theirs is implied in yours. Excuse me. I said that languages gain their meaning largely from the pauses and hesitations between sounds. They obviously gain their meaning also because of the sounds not used, so that any one language also implies the existence of all others. To that extent, all other languages reside silently. within any given spoken language. The same applies to language written upon a page. The written characters make sense because of their arrangement, and precisely because they are chosen over the characters that do not appear. In the same kind of manner, your focused existence is dependent upon all those existences that are not you. You are a part of them. You ride upon their existences, though you are primarily you and no other. The same applies, however, to every other person. Each of them becomes a primary focus or identity within which all others are implied. In ordinary terms, you do not make yourselves. You are like a living language spoken by someone who did not originate it. The language was there for you to use. The language, in this case, is a molecular one that speaks your physical being. The components of that language, or the earth elements that form the body, were already created when you were born, as the alphabet of your particular language was waiting to be used. Your very physical life then implies a source, a life out of which the physical one emerges, the implied, unspoken, unmaterialized, unsounded vitality that supplied the ingredients for the physical body molecular alphabet. Your physical life, therefore, implies a non-physical one. You take your particular language so for granted and use it so effortlessly that you give it no thought at all to the fact that it implies other languages also, or that it gains its meaning because of inner assumptions that are never spoken, or by the use of pauses in which no sounds are made. You live your lives in the same fashion. There are many languages, though most people speak one or two or three at most. Languages also have accents, each somewhat different, while still maintaining the original integrity of any given language. To some extent, you can learn to speak yourself with an accent, so to speak. Say that I smiled. In which case, still being yourself, you allow yourself to take on some of the attributes of another language. You can read the world in a different way while still maintaining your own identity, or you can move into a different country of yourself that speaks your native language, but with a different slant. You do this to some extent or another whenever you tune in to the broadcasts, to which you usually pay no attention. The news is slightly foreign, while it's still interpreted through the language that you know. You are getting a translation of reality. The psyche, always in a state of becoming, obviously has no precise boundaries. The existence of one again implies the existence of all. And so, any one given psyche comes into prominence also because of the existence of the others upon which reality rides. One television station exists in the same manner, for one could not be tuned into, theoretically speaking. None could. If one could not be tuned into, theoretically speaking, none could. These inner communications then reach outward in all directions. Each identity has eternal validity within the psyche's greater reality. At one level, then, any person contacting his or her own psyche can theoretically contact any other psyche. Life implies death, and death implies life. That is, in the terms of your world. In those terms, life is a spoken element, while death is the unspoken, but still present element beneath upon which life rides. But still present element beneath upon which life rides. Both are equally present. To obtain knowledge consciously, other than that usually available, you pay attention to the pauses, to the implied elements in language, to any felt or sensed quality upon which the recognizable experiences of life reside. There are all kinds of information available to you, but it must be perceived through your own focus or identity. I have said that all events occur at once, a difficult statement to understand. All identities occur at once also. Each event changes every other. Present ones alter past ones. Any one event implies the existence of probable events which do not emerge, which are not spoken. Physical world events therefore rest upon the existence of implied probable events. Different languages use sounds in their own peculiar manners, with their own rhythms, one emphasizing what the other ignores. Other probabilities, therefore, emphasize events that are not only implied, as in your reality, so that your physical events become the implied probable ones upon which other worlds reside. In a manner of speaking, then, you use the language of the atoms and molecules in your own private way. You mark the universe. You impress it or stamp it or imprint it with your own identity. Henceforth, it is always recognized. Henceforth, it always recognizes you as you and no others. You are then known. In larger terms, while you speak your own language, the universe also speaks your language as it constantly translates itself into your private perception. Remember, I said that you lived in your psyche somewhat the same way that physically you dwell in the world. That world has many languages. Physically, you are like one country within your psyche, with a language of your own. People are always searching for master languages, or for one in particular out of which the others emerged. In a way, Latin was the master language. In the same manner, people look for gods, or a god, out of which all psyches emerged. Here you are searching for the implied source, the unspoken, invisible pause, the inner organization that gives language, or the self, a vehicle of expression. Language has finally become archaic. Some words are entirely forgotten in one language, but spring up in altered form in another. All of the earth's languages, however, are united because of the characteristic pauses and hesitations upon which the different sounds ride. Even the alterations of obvious pauses between languages make sense only because of the implied, unstated inner rhythm. The historic gods become equally archaic. Their differences are often obvious. When you are learning a language, great mystery seems involved. When you are learning about the nature of the psyche, an even greater aura of the unknown exists. The unknown portions of the psyche and its greater horizons, therefore, have often been perceived as gods, or as the greater psyches out of which the self emerged. As, for example, Latin is a source for the Romance languages. Using ordinary language, you speak with your fellows. You write histories and communications. Many books are meant to be read and never to be spoken aloud. Through written language, then, communication is vastly extended. In direct contact, however, you encounter not only the spoken language of another, but you are also presented with the communicator's person as well. Spoken language is embellished with smiles, frowns, or other gestures, and these add to the meaning of the spoken word. Often when you read a book, you silently mouth the words as if to reinforce their symbolic content with a more emotional immediacy. The language of the psyche, however, is far richer and more varied. Its words spring alive. Its verbs really move and do not simply signify or stand for motion. Its nouns become what they signify. Its declensions are multidimensional. Its verbs and nouns can become interchangeable. In a way, the psyche is its own language. At any given time, all of its tenses are present tense. In other words, it has multitudinous tenses, all in the present, or it has multitudinous present tenses. Within it, no word dies or becomes archaic. The language is experience. Psychically, then, you can and you cannot say that there is a source. The very fact that you question, is there a God or a source, shows that you misunderstand the issues. In the same manner, when you ask, is there a master language, it is apparent that you do not understand what language itself is. Otherwise, you would know that language is dependent upon other implied ones, and that the two or all of them are themselves and yet inseparable, so closely connected that it is impossible to separate them, even though your focus may be on one language alone. So the psyche and its source, or the individual and the God, are so inseparable and interconnected that an attempt to find one apart from the other automatically confuses the issue. The physical world implies the existence of a God. God's existence also implies the existence of a physical world. This statement implies the unstated, and the reverse also applies. To deny the validity or importance of the individual is therefore also to deny the importance or validity of God, for the two exist one within the other, and you cannot separate them. From one end of reality, you shout, "Where is God?" And from the other end, the answer comes, "I am me." From the other end of reality, God goes shouting, "Who am I?" and finds himself in you. You are therefore part of the source, and so is everything else manifest. Because God is, you are. Because you are, God is. On a conscious level, certainly you are not at all. You are not all that God is, for that is the unstated, unmanifest portion of yourself. Your being rides upon the unstated reality as the letter of the alphabet rides upon the inner organizations that are implied by its existence. In those terms, your unstated portions reach backward to a source called God. As various languages can be traced back to their source, master languages can be compared to the historic gods. Each person alive is part of the living God, supported in life by the magnificent power of nature, which is God translated into the elements of earth and the universe. Your daily language deals with separations, divisions, and distinctions. To some extent, your language organizes your feelings and emotions. The language of the psyche, however, has at its command many more symbols than can be combined in many more ways, say, than mere letters of the alphabet. In daily language, objects have certain names. Obviously, the names are not the objects, but symbols for them. Even these symbols, however, divide you as the perceiver from the rest of the world, which becomes objectified. You can yourself understand far more about the nature of the psyche, for example, than you think you can. To do this, however, you must leave your daily language behind, at least momentarily, and pay attention to your own feelings and imagination. Your language tells you that certain things are true or facts, and that certain things are not. Many of your most vivid and moving feelings do not fit the facts of your language, so you disregard them. These emotional experiences, however, often express the language of the psyche. It is not that an understanding of your psyche is beyond you. It's usually that you try to understand or experience it in one of the most difficult ways, through the use of daily language. The imagination belongs to the language of the psyche. For this reason, it often gives experiences that conflict with the basic assumptions upon which daily language is based. Therefore, the imagination is often considered suspect. You might stand alone in your doorway, or in a field, or even on a street surrounded by many people in a large city. Look upward, suddenly struck by the great sweeping clouds above, and feel yourself a part of them. You might momentarily experience a great yearning, or feel your emotions suddenly filled with that same moving majesty, so that for an instant you and the sky seem to be one. Mundane language tells you, as you think with its patterns, that your imagination is running away from you. For obviously you are one thing and the sky is another. You and sky do not equate. Or, as a friend Spock would say, it is not logical. The feeling swiftly fades after bemusing you briefly. You might be spiritually refreshed, yet as a rule you would not consider the feeling to be a statement of any legitimate reality or a representation of your psyche's existence. Its emotion and the imagination, however, give you your closest contact with other portions of your own reality. They also liberate your intellect so that its powers are not limited by concepts it has been taught are true. Instead, such concepts are relatively true, operationally true. For example, the physical laws that you are familiar with operate where you are. They are true, relatively speaking. In those terms, you are one person physically objectified, staring upward in the scene just mentioned, in an objectified sky. You weigh so many pounds, you tilt your head such and such an angle to peer upward at the skyscape, and physically speaking, you can be categorized. In those terms, the clouds could be physically measured and shown to be so far above you, composed of, say, winds of a certain velocity ready to pour down a precise amount of rain or whatever. Physically speaking, then, obviously, you are separate from the clouds, and so in those terms, your momentary experience of uniting with them would seem to be a lie, at least not factual, or the product of your imagination. Instead, such an event is a direct expression of the psyche's knowledge. It senses its quite legitimate identification with nature, exercises its mobility, and feels its own emotional power leap. Your emotions, in such a case, would be momentarily magnified, raised, say, to a higher power. There are multitudinous such examples that could be given, as in each day your psyche presents evidence of its own greater being, evidence that you are taught to overlook or to dismiss because it is not factual. What is imaginary is not true. You are taught this as children. The imagination, however, brings you into connection with a different kind of truth or a different framework in which experience can be legitimately perceived. The larger truths of the psyche exist in that dimension. From it, You choose physical facts. Thoughts are real. Only some thoughts turn into physical actions, of course. Despite distorted versions of that last statement, however, there is still obviously a distinct difference, say, between the thought of adultery and its physical expression. You cannot treat thoughts and imagination in such a literal manner, nor in a large respect should you try to guard your thoughts as if they were herds of animals that you wanted to keep purely bred. Your thoughts do form your reality. If you do not fear them, however, they create their own balances. The psyche dwells in a reality so different from the world you usually recognize that they're there, good and evil as you think of them, are also seen to be as operationally or relatively true as the difference between the perceiver and the object perceived. In larger terms, it is futile to question whether or not dreams are true, for they simply are. You do consider a dream true, however, if its events later occur, in fact. In the life of the psyche, a dream is no more or less true, whether or not it is duplicated in waking life. Dream events happen in a different context. One, you might say, of the imagination. Here you experience a valid reality that exists on its own, so to speak. One in which the psyche's own language is given greater freedom. Some of you may try to remember your dreams, but none of you have to relate to dream reality as you must to physical life. To some extent, however, you form physical events while you are dreaming. Then, freed from waking limitations, you process your experience, weigh it according to your own intents and purposes, and correlate it with any information. With information so vast, you could not be consciously aware of it. In most dreams, you do not simply think of a situation. You imaginatively become part of it. It is real in every fashion except that of physical fact. When you meet with any fact, you encounter the tail end of a certain kind of creativity. The psyche, however, is responsible for bringing facts into existence. And that reality, a so-called fact, is equally true or equally false. The dream that you remember is already a translation of a deeper experience. It is cast for you so that it bridges the perception of the psyche and the perception of the dreaming self. Dreams serve as dramas, transferring experience from one level of the psyche to another. In certain portions of sleep, your experience reaches into areas of being so vast that the dream is used to translate it for you. The power to dream springs from that source. Dreaming is not a passive activity. It demands a peculiar and distinctive mixture of various kinds of consciousness and the transformation of non-physical perceptions into symbols and codes that will be sensually understood, though not directly experienced, as in a waking experience. You take dreaming for granted, yet it is the result of a characteristic ability that is responsible for the very subjective feeling that you call conscious life. Without it, your normal consciousness would not be possible. A spoken language is, again, dependent upon all other languages that could possibly be spoken, and thus its sounds rise into prominence and order because of the silences and pauses between them. So your waking consciousness is dependent upon what you think of as sleeping or dreaming consciousness. It rises into prominence in somewhat the same fashion, riding upon other possible versions of yourself, alert only because, in your terms, of hidden pauses within its alertness. The ability to dream presupposes the existence of experience that is not defined as physical fact. It presupposes a far greater freedom in which perception is not dependent upon space or time, a reality in which objects appear or are dismissed with equal ease, a subjective framework in which the individual freely expresses what he or she will in the most direct of fashions, yet without physical contact in usual terms. That reality represents your origin and is the natural environment in which the psyche resides. Your beliefs, cultural background, and to some extent your languages set up barriers so that this dream dimension seems unreal to you. Even when you catch yourself in the most vivid of dreams or find yourself traveling outside your body while dreaming, you still do not give such experiences equal validity with waking ones. Subjectively speaking, you are everywhere, surrounded by your own greater reality, but you do not look in the right places. You have been taught not to trust your feelings, your dreams, or your imagination, precisely because these do not often fit the accepted reality of facts. They are the creators of facts, however. In no way do I mean to demean the intellect. It is here, however, that the tyranny of the fact world holds greatest sway. The intellect has been denied its wings. Its field of activity has been limited because you have given it only facts to go on. Biologically, you are quite capable of dealing with dreaming and waking reality both, and of forming a far more effective synthesis in that regard. All of your creative impulses arise from that hidden dimension, the very impulses that formed your greatest cities, your technology, and the physical cement that binds your culturally organized world. The creative impulses are behind your languages, and yet often you use the languages to silence rather than free inner communication. There have always been rhythms in consciousness that are not historically obvious. At certain times, some behavior has been primarily expressed in the waking state, and sometimes in the dream state. The emphasis is never static, but ever-changing. In some periods, then, the normal behavior was more dreamlike, while more specific developments occurred in the dream state, which was then the more clear or specified of the two. Men went to sleep to do their work. In other words, the realm of dreams was considered more real than waking reality. Now, the opposite is true. End of session. My heartiest regards. I wish you exciting experiences in the dreams you will have tonight, now that I'm telling you all about how to do it.